Hey guys, I'm here today at the FJA Masters event in West Palm Beach. Really excited. I have the current FJA president, Stephen Cain, with us today. Really excited. He's here and amazing attorney. He's got a practice in Miami-Dade County. He handles cases all over the country. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and what firm you're with and a little bit about you.
Sure. I grew up in the panhandle of Florida, so I've been a lifelong Floridian. Made my way down to Miami for law school and joined the firm that I'm currently with, Stewart Tillman, Fox, Bianchi, and Cain, back in 2002.
Wow. Okay. So when you say the panhandle, I mean, we got to agree that that's not really Florida, right?
Well, we call it L.A., Lower Alabama.
Okay. Yeah. But cool. I'm glad to have another fellow Floridian there. I was born in Miami, so a little bit further south, not too much. But cool. And so you went, what law school did you go to?
University of Miami.
Okay, cool. And I'm a Panther, so I think we have beef. I don't know, but anyways, so you have really built a national practice around personal injury, birth defects, right? Birth injury cases.
Birth injury cases. Yeah.
Okay. And what other types of cases do you handle? Just like odd cases that, I think everybody handles car accident cases, right? I met a tax lawyer who handled a car accident case, but what kind of practice areas would you say are not the norm that people might say, oh, wow, I didn't know he handled that?
Well, we end up getting brought in by a lot of workers' comp attorneys in cases where workers have been injured. We're looking for product cases in those instances. We had one gentleman that we represented who passed away and left a wife and two kids. The challenge in that case was getting around the workers' compensation system. And we were able to do that through the use of gross negligence. So, we're always trying to figure out how we can best help a client. And in many cases, where workers' comp would drastically limit the recovery in a case like that, the family would be looking at $150,000 approximately. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's not enough to sustain the family for forever.
Yeah, to replace that. First of all, you got the family member, the father, who is obviously a father figure, but also produces income for the family.
Absolutely.
To replace that income, is that the cap in Florida? $150,000.
Yeah, I think it's $100. I think it's $150,000. I think there's a death benefit too, but all told, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000.
Yeah, it's nothing, right? It's probably one of those things like PIP. They haven't increased the PIP coverage since 1970 something. It's been $10,000. And it's just there at 10,000. It's really nothing anymore, right? It's valueless. Yeah. Right. Wow. That's interesting. Those cases with the work injury component, I know that the work comp sounds great in theory, right? You get injured on the job, you're going to get taken care of. Your medical bills will get taken care of. You can't sue your employer because they have work comp and that, covers your medical expenses. But the problem with work comp is the insurance company who's paying the bill decides which doctor you go to. And they say, hey, go to this doctor, go to that doctor. And they're usually very conservative. And the doctors have an interest in saying, he's fine, get him back to work. Because the more they do that, the more referrals they get from the insurance company who controls the referrals.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. The system's really, frankly broken. Mm-hmm. If you're a worker, because there's really no good benefits available to an injured worker. And like you mentioned, the doctors in that space, the employer controls who and where you go to. Mm-hmm. And while there are mechanisms in place for you to get a second opinion, I think you can only do that one time. We don't practice in the workers' compensation space. Instead, we end up working with a lot of workers' comp lawyers mm-hmm. who realize that they ought to have someone like our firm take a look at it and see if there's any other avenues available. We've got one case right now that we're just beginning involving Amazon and one of their truck drivers. And we're looking at that case with an eye towards getting around workers' comp in that case because of gross negligence. And unfortunately, the gentleman suffered a catastrophic injury to his lower leg, probably will never walk normally again, won't be able to return to the type of work he was doing at Amazon. So,
wow,
tragic.
Life-changing stuff, not just pain-wise, but also financially. Because at the end of the day, we got to recognize a lot of people, they live paycheck to paycheck or not far from it. So to be losing the ability to walk normally could impact somebody's life, set them back a year or 2 years, maybe even more financially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for many of the injured workers, they may never go back to that job. And the reality is, for many of them, it's hard to go find a job when you're now injured or you've got limitations in what you can do going forward. So, I get a lot of satisfaction out of those kinds of cases where, we're really trying to explore the other avenues for recovery for those families who might be left with really inadequate compensation.
Okay. So just about that Amazon case, are there any facts in the pleadings that you could mention that or that you're allowed to talk about that where you're talking about gross negligence?
Well, I mean, go back to the bridge collapse case. That was one where we actually sued the other employees in those cases, or in these workers' comp cases. And in that case, the problem was they weren't complying with just basic safety standards when they were building the pad. Obviously, the ground gave way. So we're actually not suing the company. In that instance, we sued them for virtual certainty, which is a very, very high hurdle. But we could sue the other employees that were responsible in a gross negligence capacity. And ultimately, the employer can be on the hook responsible for their employees.
Was that a public lawsuit or was that settled pre-suit?
In that case, we had filed the lawsuit. We were in litigation. There was a companion case. There were 2 workers involved in the incident. Our client unfortunately passed away. The other one was suffered pretty significant orthopedic injuries and had a traumatic brain injury.
Wow. I mean, obviously, you're an amazing litigator. You're a smart guy. They called you, said, hey, we got a big injury case here. We need to pull out the big guns. Have you ever handled something like that before?
We did the FIU bridge collapse case. We were involved in that case.
Okay. That FIU bridge collapse was pretty sad, right? I mean, that was like right in front of the campus. I think a lot of the people there were young. Some of them were college students. And that bridge was supposed to be a technological feat, how quickly they put it up. And sometimes you do things too quickly and, this sort of stuff happens, right? So,
well, it was really, a tragic, a tragedy because they didn't build, they used a unique structure. It was only one support beam effectively in the bridge design. And once the bridge was put into place, there was all kinds of cracking in the concrete, and it was, just a mess. Unfortunately, there were a couple of people who lost their lives. Our client, we represented the family. He suffered catastrophic injuries and will never be the same guy that he was. And we represented his children.
Wow. Yeah, that's, sometimes a lot of people, you see all these billboards, right? The predatory billboard lawyers that we got blasted for being a while ago, but people don't realize the value of having an advocate on your side when you're driving one day, minding your business, and all of a sudden a bridge just over your head collapses on top of you. Who's going to take care of your family? Who's going to take care of your kids? Who's going to provide for them an education down the road? It just sets back the family emotionally, but by removing that father figure, but also financially. And so people don't forget that we're on their side, right? We're there to protect them from these huge multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar companies that say, oh, we didn't do anything wrong here. And a guy like you comes in and says, wait a second, we're doing an investigation. We're going to get discovery and look into this stuff. So very interesting. Talking about predatory billboard lawyers, which is what our label was by the governor recently. You were up in Tallahassee fighting that bill,
Absolutely.
House Bill 837. And I want to say thank you from all of the personal injury lawyers, but also from the consumers whose rights were going to be taken away. And people are so busy working these days, they don't. If you told somebody, the amount of money that you can collect after a car accident to pay your medical bills is going to go down, most people tell you, I don't care. I'm trying to pay my electric bill. My, gas has gone up. Netflix is increasing their prices. They're focused on day to day. They're not focused on what if. And so, we had guys like you and many others with the FJA and other organizations up there fighting for those rights. So thank you. Anything you want to talk about that legislative session? I know it's probably a bad memory, but
it certainly left a bad taste in our mouth. Really, it was an onslaught, really designed by the Chamber of Commerce, both the state and U.S. Chamber of Commerce, big insurance companies. Mm-hmm. Obviously, insurance companies, they make their money by not paying out on claims or paying as little as possible. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, last session, many of the bad provisions sailed their way through the legislative session. One of the things that I think, we are a storm away in Florida from being in it. We're at a property insurance crisis now, one of affordability. But we're one storm away from the consumers in Florida who paid for insurance really getting taken advantage of by the insurance companies, because they were able to pass during the special session a bill that restricts the ability in the property space of the consumer who's looking to get their roof repaired or looking to get their the inside redone after they suffered damage to their property, and they won't be able to recover their attorney's fees any longer in the state of Florida. That was in over 100 years that law had been in place. I think it was something like 1892 or 1896. And with a stroke of a pen, insurance consumers in Florida are no longer going to be able to recover their insurance or their attorney's fees from the insurance companies. And that's a real tragedy. It's going to create massive problems once we have a storm really strike a populated area. I know we just had one in the Panhandle. Those folks up there are feeling the effects of it. But insurance companies oftentimes wrongfully deny claims.
Yeah.
And when they're wrongfully denied or they don't offer enough money to make the repairs, what's a consumer to do? And unfortunately, I fear that insurance companies are going to use that as leverage to pay less on claims than what a consumer really should be entitled to.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. We have a part of our practice that handles these homeowner claims, and we represented probably 300 people after Hurricane Ian. And good people, normal people, bought a house, biggest investment they'll ever make, and some of them had a giant hole in their roof. And one of the guys that works for me had a giant hole in his roof during the storm. The guy was praying that his family would survive because there was water, like you could look up and see the sky. And the insurance company took 6 months to even talk to him. Every time he called, someone would maybe answer the phone or send him to voicemail. And after 6 months, we filed a lawsuit. And then they said, hey, we're going to give you $100,000 to fix your home. Well, it cost the guy like $150,000 to fix his home. But he needed the money. He said, you know what? I'll get some guys. They'll do the work. I'll do some of the work myself. I can't wait any longer. And they used the time against them. And Hurricane Ian was the last storm to get attorney's fees on because they changed the law. They had that special session after Hurricane Ian. But, I am fearful for a lot of people because, like, even now, after we litigate cases, these people tell me, Abe, I need $50,000 to fix my roof or fix this or fix that. And I go, the insurance company took it to appraisal and at appraisal, two guys who don't fix roofs, but they have the appraisal license, they said that it's 38,000. So you're stuck, you know? And if you know, they both agreed on it, there's nothing you could do. I hired an appraiser, they hired an appraiser, and they both agreed 38,000. So that's what you get. And luckily I'm able to get my fees separate from that. In the future, we'll have to take a percentage, right? So it's not fair to the consumer. And the worst part about it, which you know, is at the end of the day, these guys didn't lower their rates, right? No. The insurance companies still went out of business after Ian. They still denied valid claims, lowballed claims, and you know, it's wild. Without attorneys representing these people for attorneys' fees, there's less incentive, right?
Sure. And you know, we're seeing with some of these insurance companies just terrible business practices. And you know, you mentioned some of them who've gone out of business. Well, we had one insurer in the state who went out of business, who was paying their CEO more money, almost double what State Farm's CEO was making.
Yeah.
That's a problem. And unfortunately, you know, OIR, the Office of Insurance Regulation, and Department of Financial Services, who are the ones who are tasked with making sure these insurance companies are doing the right thing and being held accountable to their policyholders, have completely failed.
Yeah. Not just failed, they work for the insurance companies, not the consumers, which is really sad.
They really do. I mean, we had, as part of the Florida Justice Association, FJA, you know, we were able to identify provisions and policies that were put in place that the legislature refused to pass in a bill. So there were literally bills where the insurance companies tried to get permission from the legislature to use certain policy language that would be advantageous to them that the legislature refused to pass. But then they go to OIR and they get it stuck in the policy anyway after the legislature refused to pass it. That's criminal. That's just wrong.
Wow.
And shame on OIR and shame on DFS for really failing the citizens of Florida in that respect.
No, I agree with you. I've got two clients now who got phone calls from a DFS agent saying, "Hey, I want to investigate your claim." Interestingly enough, the insurance company denied the claim, didn't pay it, not because of fraud, because of some policy provision or some line that they don't have to pay or whatever. And their affirmative defense in a lawsuit, nothing says fraudulent, nothing, okay? Yet they go and submit a fraud thing with the Department of Financial Services, and now an agent's calling my client. And I remember calling this agent actually just a few weeks ago, and I said, "Hey, I'm the attorney for the client. Why are you calling them? You know they're represented. The insurance company gave you the file, and I'm sure my name was in there." She goes, "Oh, you're the insurance lawyer." And I go, "You're not the criminal lawyer." And I go, "No, I'm the everything lawyer." I said, "Don't talk to my clients. They have nothing to say to you." But this is becoming, unfortunately, commonplace, right? Insurance company doesn't get what they want. They go to the legislature, they go to DFS. And how many bad bills did they try to pass like the year before? You guys had mentioned a statistic or a number.
We usually, I think we'd seen 45 to 50 bills, bad bills or bad amendments that we were tracking. You know, and during the 837 battle, the latest reforms that were passed, I call them deforms, because they're not beneficial to the citizens of Florida, only to the big insurance companies and big conglomerates. But you know, one of the things that we faced, there were nearly 400 lobbyists that were filed on the 837 bill. We have 10 lobbyists with FJA. We have a lot of our citizen members, attorney members who come up and testify, but they're not registered lobbyists. So the big insurance companies, the big international corporations, you know, they're hiring lobbyists by the dozens to try and push these bills through. And we've got an army of 10, and thankfully a lot of attorneys that come up and give their time every year to try and push back, and that's really the way that we've been able to survive here in the state of Florida. And I mean, unlike many other states who've seen a lot of these reforms years ago, we've been able to sort of push back and hold the line thanks to our citizen members and attorney members.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the job that was done to get victims of really serious injuries, like Gary Miracle, who I learned about. We posted on our website some of his testimony that he gave to the legislature. I mean, the man was just pouring out his heart. He said, "I'm not here for me. I already got my settlement." He's a guy, if you Google him, Gary Miracle, he had double amputee, right? And I think both his hands had been partially. Both of his arms. And he, he went up there with his legs missing. He's on some kind of, I don't know the proper word for it, like prosthetic.
Yep.
And, he goes up there and he starts talking about how, I already got my settlement. It's not enough, but I got it. And I'm here for the next person who suffers, I think he had a medical malpractice injury, the next person, because, when you talk about tort reform, whatever, nobody benefited from this law except for the billion-dollar insurance companies. It wasn't the doctors. Look, if you tell me, hey, doctors, we're gonna lower their risk of getting sued because these pesky lawyers, fine, okay. Everybody loves their doctor, right? This wasn't a doctor. This wasn't a person. This was an insurance company. Zero need to do that. And they still haven't lowered their premiums. Premiums have gone up. And it's just wild. And there's no accountability, which is the most upsetting thing of this whole thing. We, as Floridians, we lost rights, and there's no accountability, responsibility on the insurance company's side. And I'm here waiting. I'm like waiting for them to lower the rates.
Well, I mean, we pushed amendments that would have required, for different provisions, a rate reduction by a certain percentage. Sometimes it was 5%, sometimes it was 3%, sometimes it was 10%. If this is important and you're telling Floridians that you're going to pass this bill because it will lower premiums, how about let's make them do it? The problem is they didn't do that. They're letting the insurance companies run amok. And unfortunately, us everyday Floridians are the ones paying the price.
Yeah. I'm going to run for CFO so I can do something about this. It pisses me off so much. Anyway, so you handle a lot of birth injury cases.
We do. We do a lot of medical malpractice across the state of Florida and other states as well. And one of the cases, the types of cases that I really enjoy are the birth injury cases. They're fascinating to me. The medicine is pretty detailed, but in those cases, in the birth injury cases, really you get an opportunity to help a family, help a child, make sure they have the resources they need to provide for the needs of that child going forward. So we do a lot of birth injury cases and all over the country.
And so a lot of these cases require significant amount of medical knowledge about the birthing process and what should happen, what shouldn't happen, right? And so you obviously have a great background in that. Other lawyers bring you in, I'm assuming, on some cases where they feel like there's a significant value that your firm brings to the case because of who you are and the reputation that you have for, let's just say you're the big guns coming out, right? I would imagine some insurance defense guys are like, oh, crap, this guy again, seeing your name pop up around the country for these types of cases. Do you want to talk about one case maybe they just recently had or that,
sure,
you can talk about?
We had a case in West Virginia. I guess it's been about 1.5 2 years ago now. And that case involved a nurse midwife who was going to deliver the baby, and there were problems during the labor, and the child wasn't tolerating the labor well. You if you've ever had a child, they hook up mom with a thing around her belly, and they're monitoring the baby as well as mom. And unfortunately, the child was having difficulty during the labor process. It was obvious. It was black and white on the strips, on the fetal monitoring strips, that this was a child that just wasn't going to be able to give or be delivered vaginally, and they needed to call for a C-section. That was one of the only times in my career where during a deposition, we were not only critical of the nurse midwife, but also the doctor. And, the issue was, well, was this baby really in distress? And the nurse midwife broke down during the deposition, tears in her eyes, and she testified that she was praying to God that the doctor would come in and deliver the baby. And, it was when you finally get to that point where that kind of testimony in a hard-fought case, that kind of testimony comes out, the family's going to be okay.
Yeah.
That you're going to be able to make a recovery that will make sure that this child gets whatever the child needs. And, we were able to settle the government portion of the case, which was the nurse midwife and the OBGYN. They worked for a federally funded clinic.
Okay.
So we were able to get that part of the case resolved after about 2 years. And we spent another 6 months litigating against the hospital for the failures of the nurse, because the nurse just completely had no clue. She didn't know what she was doing. She was arguing with me about what the strips did and didn't show. She didn't believe, at least according to her testimony, that the child was in any distress until the bitter end. And there were just all kinds of warning flags and warning signs that she just failed to recognize, and nobody reached out to the doctor until it was way too late.
Wow. And what was the birth injury that this child sustained?
So it was called a hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. Or we use an abbreviation, HIE. Any family who's suffered this has heard the term HIE before.
Okay.
Unfortunately, during the labor and delivery process, it's very important that the child is well oxygenated. That's why they monitor the baby in utero during the labor process, because sometimes the cords can get kinked and prevent the oxygen flow going to the baby's brain, and suffer what we call a hit to the brain. And this child suffered really catastrophic brain damage, had to be life flighted shortly after birth to a special care center. And unfortunately for this family, they're going to spend the rest of this little boy's life having to provide for him 24/7.
Wow.
And fortunately for the family, we were able to make a recovery for them to sort of ease those burdens. Can't undo what's been done. But there's a lot of satisfaction seeing that the family's being taken care of, that the little boy's being taken care of. That's really why we do it. We want to help people. And, I'm blessed to every day be able to help people through our cases. And that's really why we do what we do.
Awesome. Thanks for being on the podcast. If people want to get a hold of you, how could they get a hold of you? What's your website? How could they get in touch with you?
Sure. The website address is www.stfblaw.com. And our office number is 305-358-6644. Not a number I call a lot, but they're welcome to reach out. We specialize in medical malpractice and really catastrophic injury and death cases across the board.
Complex injury cases.
Absolutely.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Steve, I appreciate you being on.
Thanks, Abe. Great to see you.